Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. We're in a new area again. The place I recorded the last video in, it just got way too hot. There was only so many clothes that I could have continued stripping off, so I've kind of moved to my living room. It reminds me of the old days of this channel when I recorded all my videos in the living room, but until I have a more permanent recording area, this is probably where it will be so that I'm not just melting into a puddle in front of you. So hopefully this sounds good. Hopefully everything looks good. I'm sorry if it's not up to par to my usual, standards and content, but it's just a transition period and everything will be back to normal very soon. So we are back for part 2 of the Rey Rivera case. In part 1, we talked about who Rey was and how he ended up leaving sunny California for city life in Baltimore, Maryland. We also went over some of the major players in this case, including his wife Allison, his old friend from school and one-time boss, Porter Stansberry, and Agora, the company that Rey worked for, who many people believe is directly related to his death. Just as a heads up, this is going to be a long video. As I can clearly see from my notes, we're going to cover a lot. We're going to examine many theories. And if you're here with me for the long haul, you might want to grab a snack or a drink, just kind of settle in. I might even have to break this video into 2 parts depending on how long it ends up being, but I hope not. I'll try my best to fit everything into this one video, even if it's 2 hours long. Before we jump in, this video has been sponsored by Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a new kind of documentary streaming service built by documentary filmmakers who have a passion for gripping true stories. It's Magellan TV's mission to bring you the finest documentaries from around the world, and they believe in the power of telling real stories that have defined the human experience and point the way to the future. Television should be both entertaining and smart. That's why Magellan TV continues to scour the globe for documentaries with the most dramatic imagery, the most cutting-edge subjects, and authentic insights from the world's top historians, scientists, and explorers. They currently have over 2,000 documentary films and series available, and they add more every single week. All can be streamed on your cell phone, tablet, laptop, or smart TV with no ads or interruptions, and many of them are available in 4K for no additional charge. Magellan TV is available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Google Play, iOS, Vizio, and more, so you never have to be without an interesting, stimulating, and educational documentary to watch. I think it's Roku, but I say Roku because my 8-year-old son, that's what he calls the Roku. He'll always say, "Where's the Roku remote?" So now it's almost been planted in my head that it's Roku, not Roku. See, I can't even say it right. Keeping with the theme, or one of the themes of today's video, I have a recommendation on Magellan TV that I watched while researching this case. It's called Secrets of the Masons, and it's about the fact that many believe this secret society, the Freemasons, has long ruled the world. This film will examine the evidence and try to answer this question. And I know many of you have already signed up for Magellan TV and you're enjoying it. I love hearing about what you're watching, what you're looking forward to watching. But if you don't have Magellan TV yet and you're interested in checking it out, click the link in the description box to get 1 month free. No strings attached, no contracts. You can cancel anytime without issue. But I really don't think you're going to want to, especially considering that they're always adding new content every week. And I cannot even keep up with the things that I want to watch on Magellan TV. I have a long queue of things that I want to watch, and I haven't been able to yet. Simply put, Magellan TV is television worth watching, and it is my go-to for smart, entertaining content. Thank you so much to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video, and thanks to all of you out there who watch these videos and understand that having a really awesome and loyal sponsor like Magellan TV is honestly a godsend to this channel, because we do need sponsors here. All right, let's jump right into the video. Today, we're going to start with the weeks leading up to Rey's disappearance on May 16th, 2006. What was he doing? What was his mental state? Was he acting differently, unusual, or out of character? According to his wife Allison, he was acting differently, nervous, and on edge. He wanted to go with her everywhere, including to a nearby track where she would go running every day. He would normally sit on the bleachers and read while she ran, but one day it was pouring outside, so Rey decided to sit in the car and wait for Allison. And on this day, she claims she spotted a strange man, walking towards her as she was running on the track. And she kind of stopped and was looking at him. And then all of a sudden, Rey, her husband, vaulted himself out of the car and ran towards the track, stopping as he got to the edge of it. At this point, the man switched directions and walked away. This was not the only time Allison would see her husband display unusual fear. On May 15th at 1 a.m, the security alarm at their house went off. They'd been living there for 2 years, and not once had the alarm ever been triggered. Allison was woken up by the sound and ran downstairs, only to see Rey running out of his office holding a baseball bat with fear etched into his face. She said she'd never seen him be as afraid as he was at that moment. The police arrived and they looked around, but they told Allison and Rey that they believed squirrels had triggered the alarm. Now remember, they had been living there for 2 years and squirrels had never set that alarm off. But at that point, Allison wrote it off as a fluke and didn't think anything more about it. That was until the alarm went off again the next night, May 16th at 1 a.m. Once again, the police arrived and said it was nothing, but Allison claims a window of the house had been tampered with, the master bedroom window. She didn't have much time to dwell on it, however, because she was leaving for a business trip early the next morning and had a 3-hour drive ahead of her to Richmond, Virginia. So they went back to bed, and the next morning, Allison woke up and packed for her trip. She and Rey had breakfast together, and then he walked her out to her car, carrying her suitcase for her. She kissed him goodbye and told him she would see him in a few days, before driving away, not realizing she would never see him alive again. When she got to Richmond, she went to a few meetings, did the stuff that she was there to do, and then she checked into her hotel. And this was at around 6:30 p.m. When she'd settled in, she picked up her phone and called Rey, but the phone just rang until eventually it reached his voicemail. She left a message updating him on where she was and what she was doing before asking him to call her back when he had a chance. But Rey did not call her back. A few hours passed and Allison was getting ready for bed, but she still hadn't heard from Rey, and this was unusual. Whenever either of them was out of town, they always made sure to call each other and check in to say goodnight. So she tried his phone again, but there was no answer. So Allison called her work colleague and friend, a woman named Claudia, who'd been staying with Allison and Rey for a few days. When Allison had left to go to Richmond, Claudia was still there. She was planning on leaving, the next day or so to go back to New York City. When Allison got Claudia on the phone, Claudia told Allison that she didn't know if Rey was home, but she would go check. When she got back to the phone, Claudia said he wasn't there. He wasn't in the house, but she had seen him earlier that day. Rey was working from home that day on a video for the Oxford Club, and he was on a deadline. May 16th was a Tuesday. The project was due the following Wednesday, so not the next day, but the week after the next day. And earlier, Rey had called and booked an editing suite for the following Monday. Mark Gold took the call and claimed he and Rey had a completely normal conversation. Besides, it seemed like Rey was stressed out because he was on a time crunch for work. According to Claudia, Rey had gone into the kitchen around 4 p.m. on May 16th to get a snack, choosing a bag of sour cream and onion potato chips and a can of sparkling grapefruit juice. After that, he went back into his office to continue working, but Claudia, whose guest room was right next to Rey's office, heard his phone ring sometime around 6 p.m. She claims he picked it up, said hello, he listened while the other person said something, and then Rey exclaimed, "Oh shit," before running out of the house wearing exactly what he was wearing, which was, I think, shorts and flip-flops and like a zip-up shirt. A few minutes later, she claims he came back as if he had forgotten something, but then left right away again. The next morning at 5:30 a.m., Claudia called Allison to tell her that Rey had never come home the night before. Allison kept trying to get a hold of her husband on his cell phone, but all her calls went right to voicemail as if the phone had been turned off or as if the battery had died. She tried to talk herself down, rationalize theorizing that Rey might have just had a few too many drinks with some coworkers and crashed on someone's couch, but her sense of unease grew. It was not like Rey to stay out all night and not check in. He would know that she'd be worried, so he'd find a way to get a hold of her even if he'd lost his phone or it had died. She hastily packed up her suitcase and got in her car to drive home. On the way, she called Rey's mother, Maria, who was living in Puerto Rico, to see if she'd heard from him, but Maria hadn't. She called Rey's brother Angel, who was living in Florida, but he hadn't heard from Rey either. She called everyone she could think of, his friends, people he'd worked with at Agora and the Oxford Club, Porter Stansberry, family members, but no one had heard from or seen him. As soon as she pulled into the driveway at their Baltimore home, Allison noticed right away that the car he would have been driving, a 2001 Mitsubishi Montero, was not in the driveway. The first things she saw when she walked into the house was a bag of chips on the counter and a can of sparkling water next to it, along with Rey's Invisalign retainer. The lights were on in the kitchen, in his office, and in their bedroom, and Rey's toothbrush was still in the bathroom. It was as if he had forgotten about an appointment and rushed out so that he wouldn't be late, but he had certainly not been planning to stay out all night. Allison called the police and reported Rey missing at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, May 17th. Rey's family members got on planes from their respective cities to fly to Baltimore and help Allison look for him. Allison's own parents also flew in from Colorado, and their house became a control center for one mission: finding Rey Rivera. They all started making calls to help locate him. They called the hospitals, the police, anyone he knew in and out of Baltimore. They began printing posters and handing them out, taping them into shop windows and onto telephone poles. And Rey's old friend Porter, his old friend and his old boss, who was out of town at the time of his disappearance, came back so he could be right there with them, putting up a $1,000 reward for any information that could help locate Rey. Porter told the Baltimore Sun, quote, "He's a happy guy. He and his wife just booked a trip to go to New Mexico in a few weeks. This is not a man who wanted to leave. I've got to find my friend. I can't imagine my life without him. He's my best friend," end quote. Rey's cell phone was off. There had been no activity on his credit cards, and he hadn't made any cash withdrawals. He'd vanished without a trace. His family and his wife knew, or thought they knew, that there was foul play involved. His brother Angel told the Baltimore Sun, quote, "It's completely out of character. He's not only going to tell you where he's going to tell you how he got there. For him to go this long and not contact any of his family or friends, it's got everyone scared," end quote. On May 22nd, after Rey had been missing for 6 days, Allison's parents decided to drive around Baltimore and check out parking lots to see if they could find his car parked somewhere on the side of the road or in one of these lots. By this time, Allison was feeling pretty hopeless, and she thought it was a long shot, but she told them to go ahead if they felt that it would help. And Allison's parents actually located Rey's vehicle in a lot behind a building on St. Paul Street, sitting benignly in spot number 7 with a ticket affixed to the windshield. The parking lot attendant said that the car had not been there when he'd left the previous night at 6 p.m., but it was there the next morning when he showed up to work, and that's when he put the ticket on it. So to follow logic, we can assume that the car would have had to have been parked there sometime after 6 p.m., when the parking lot attendant left and before the parking lot attendant arrived to work the next morning. This parking lot that Rey's car was found in was in a very interesting area, not an area that he often frequented, at least not outside of work hours. The two places of note that are within the vicinity of this parking lot are the Belvedere Hotel, which is right behind it. The second place is the headquarters of Agora Financial, which is on St. Paul Street, just a few blocks away from where Rey's vehicle was found, and where a short time later his body would be found. I did the Google map and everything. I think it's a 3-minute drive from the Belvedere to Agora Financial's headquarters and a 7 or 8-minute walk. Okay, so here we are in Baltimore. This here, where my mouse is, this is Chase Street. And Allison's parents said they found Rey's car in a parking lot off of Chase Street. And I believe that this is the parking lot. If we move over here to this building behind the parking lot, this building here is the Belvedere Hotel right here. So now I typed in 808 St. Paul Street, Baltimore, Maryland. That was the former Grand Lodge of the Order of the Sons of Italy and the current headquarters of Agora Financial. And as you can see, it's not far away. So once again, here is the Belvedere Hotel where Rey's body was found. And right there is where Agora Financial's headquarters are. It's just a couple of blocks away. The discovery of the SUV did really nothing to help the investigation. There was nothing, according to the police, of evidentiary value inside the car. A detective on the case at that time, Fred Bealfield, said there was nothing to indicate that there had been a theft of the vehicle, nor was there anything in Rey's background that they had uncovered which would give a logical reason for why he would be in that area and then just disappear. His wallet was not inside the car. His cell phone was not inside the car. He was not inside the car. The best information gained from finding it was to give investigators a better idea of where he had been when he went missing, since they knew he had parked the car there the same night he left his house and never came back. By the time Allison arrived at the parking lot 10 minutes later, the police and the media had already arrived and were swarming. She remembered looking up and around at all the buildings and thinking, "Why were you here? Why would you be here?" The car was the first clue to what happened to Rey Rivera, and it increased the interest in the case. The searches for Rey became focused on this area around that parking lot, and that's when 3 friends and co-workers of Rey's decided to go up onto the roof of the parking garage next to the Belvedere Hotel. I'm not sure what prompted them to do this besides just maybe curiosity and a lack of other options, since they'd been searching everywhere. They'd pretty much looked everywhere else. But when they were up there, they spotted a few things on the lower roof. About 20 feet below them, they saw a flip-flop on the roof and a hole. They immediately called the police, who showed up to the Belvedere and asked to speak to the building manager, who at that time was a man named Gary Shivers. He'd been working at the Belvedere for about 20 years, so he'd been there for quite a while. They needed him to unlock the door to the area in the Belvedere, which would be located directly under the hole on the roof. And this was the old racquetball courts and pool area. But as we talked about previously in part 1, it was now office space that had been previously occupied by a church group, but had been empty for some time. A few employees who worked at the catering company that was using the office space across the hall had been complaining for a few days about a bad smell coming from that area. They'd just assumed that a rat or another small animal had gotten trapped in a wall or a ceiling and died. When Gary unlocked and opened the door, he said the first thing he smelled was the stench of decomposition, and he could immediately see a wall with blood that had dripped down it. He left after that. He kind of ran right out. He turned around and he ran right out, and he claims that he has never forgotten that. Every time he opens the door to a room now, he almost relives it. He just has never forgotten the smell and the feeling of kind of stumbling upon this. Rey's body was in very bad shape. It was lying in prone position with his feet towards the door. The body was battered and almost unrecognizable, so they wouldn't know exactly what had caused his death until his autopsy was complete. While they were waiting for that, police began processing the scene on the roof. During my research for this case, I read a book that I highly suggest. If you're interested in learning more about this case, you should read this book. It's called An Unexplained Death, The True Story of a Body at the Belvedere, and it's by an author named Makita Brotman. She wrote this book in 2018, but she was living at the Belvedere in 2006 when Rey went missing, and she remembered in the days before the discovery of his body, seeing the posters of him around the city and thinking to herself, what could have happened to this handsome, happy-looking man? Now, Makita was actually watching from the window of her apartment, which overlooked the rooftop scene as the police were there. And she claims that she was very surprised how cavalier the investigating officers were about the whole situation. On the 16th, Rey had left his house wearing a black jacket and flip-flops. When his body was found, he was still wearing that black jacket, but both flip-flops were found on the roof above him, that lower roof that his friends had seen from the parking garage roof. And these flip-flops were located about 60 feet apart from each other. Brotman wrote in her book that one of the officers picked up a flip-flop and threw it down to another officer, accidentally hitting him on the head, and then they both laughed about it. She said, quote, "I did not see them putting anything in an evidence bag, taking photographs, or checking for fingerprints." End quote. The flip-flops themselves were not in great condition. They had drag marks on the bottoms and on the sides, and one of them was completely torn, the top part basically ripped and coming apart from the bottom of the sandal. His phone and his sunglasses were also found on the rooftop. Both were in perfect condition with not a scratch on them. In the pocket of Ray's pants was an American Express card and a Maryland driver's license, as well as a penny with the shape of a small heart cut out of it. This penny had been a token that Allison had brought back for Ray after one of her business trips. And when she gave it to him, she told him, "Whenever you need me, you hold this penny and you'll know I'm close." Ray usually kept the penny in a small bowl on his dresser. That was where Allison had always seen it, but for some reason on that day, he decided to bring it with him when he left the house, and she had no idea why. Something significant that was missing from his person, which Allison claimed he always had on him, was a money clip that she'd given him as a wedding gift. It was engraved with RR, his initials, and this was where he would typically keep his credit cards, money, and identification. That money clip was not found with Ray. It wasn't found on the rooftop with his other belongings or in his vehicle, and still to this day, it has not been found. And Allison feels this is significant because it was the one thing he'd always had on him since they got married. Michael Bayer was also a detective assigned to the case, and he would become very invested in finding out what happened to Rey Rivera. He claimed that he felt the scene looked staged. How would Ray's sunglasses and cell phone have been on that roof with Ray wherever he jumped from? And then he went through this hole on the lower roof, and his sunglasses, his flip-flops, his phone, they stayed on the roof with the hole in it with no damage to them. And how had both of his flip-flops come off and not been with him on his feet, or at least in the room below? Why had the police not bagged the evidence using gloves so they could possibly dust them for fingerprints later? Most likely because the Baltimore PD had already made up their minds that Rey Rivera had jumped and taken his own life. So what was there to investigate? And as we go forward in this story, we're going to see how accounts of the situation begin to branch off, and you'll get a different story depending on who you talk to. The police say they went through the Belvedere Hotel and questioned employees and residents to find out if anyone had seen Ray. According to them, no one had seen or heard anything. Now, Makita Brotman, who lived in that building at the time, claims she was never questioned, neither was anyone else in the building that she asked while writing her book. If she had been questioned, she would have been able to provide the police with some interesting information. She wrote in her book, quote, "Later that night, lying in bed, I suddenly remember something. About a week ago, around 10 at night, while we were reading in bed, Dee and I heard a loud noise outside. It was loud enough to make the windows shake in their frames. Loud enough to make me get out of bed, go over and look down into the street to see if there had been a car crash. The Belvedere stands on the intersection of two busy streets in the middle of an area with plenty of bars and restaurants. It can be noisy at weekends, but this was a weeknight and the streets were quiet. Seeing nothing and hearing nothing more, we quickly dismissed the crash as just another of those inexplicable noises in the night. I'd made a note of the mysterious noise in my journal. It had occurred on the previous Tuesday, May 16th, the day Rey Rivera went missing." End quote. Additionally, Makita claims that after Ray's body had been taken away to have an autopsy and the police had packed up and left, she went down to the area of the former swimming pool, curious about what was going on, but thinking she wouldn't be able to see much because the scene would be taped off or have a police guard or something. But the door to the vacant office space was left propped open to air it out and get rid of the smell. Anyone could have gone in or out freely. Another person on Reddit who claimed to work for the catering company across the hall from that office at the Belvedere wrote that the crime scene was never secured, and some staff from the catering company, as well as a doctor's office also located in the old hotel, were allowed to look around the room, describing the room as looking as if someone had thrown red paint on the wall, and the room was filled with maggots and flies. So right from the get-go, it seems the police were treating the investigation as an open and shut suicide. Before even processing the evidence, before even getting the autopsy results back, before even really questioning anybody. The police also collected surveillance from the Belvedere. But here's the thing. They were able to get the surveillance footage from inside the hotel, but they claimed the rooftop camera, the one which was most likely to have captured Rey on the roof, was malfunctioning at that time. An article from the year after Rey's death says, quote, "The Belvedere Hotel has an extensive security camera system, but technical problems prevented police from recovering the data from the cameras on the days in question," end quote. Now, in the Unsolved Mysteries episode, we hear a different story. They were able to review footage from inside the hotel on May 16th and 17th, but the camera on the roof was unplugged, not malfunctioning, unplugged. We hear a different story in Makita Brotman's book as well. She claims the police took the footage and kept it for weeks, suggesting, in her words, that it must have contained something of interest. Brotman writes, quote, "When it was finally returned to the Belvedere, Gary Shivers sat with Allison Rivera in the concierge booth and watched the footage with her. She was there for a long time. The tapes covered a period until the night before Rey went missing. Then it jumped to more current footage as if someone had deleted the night of May 16th. End quote. To me, that right there is very suspicious, but that's just my opinion. According to Detective Bayer, Rey's autopsy was a brutal reading. 24 broken ribs, which had punctured his heart and lungs, a broken pelvis, cuts and tears to the right groin area, multiple cuts and bruises to his torso, damage to his skull. The right leg had 2 different breaks in it to the point that bone was protruding through flesh. There were also 2 large lacerations on both his sides. This healthy 6'5", 160-pound man was so battered and broken, it was hard to comprehend even for those who hadn't known him in life. The case was ruled initially as a suicide, but his wife Allison didn't buy it. So she met personally with the medical examiner who had done Rey's autopsy. According to Allison, the ME told her, quote, "I know what they're trying to do, and we are not closing this case," end quote. The medical examiner either didn't want to or couldn't say much more because all she would reveal to Allison was that the injuries Rey had sustained were consistent with the fall for the most part, except for the way his shins were broken. She would not reveal any more. But she did write on the report that she believed his death was inconclusive. It was not ruled on the medical examiner's autopsy report as a suicide. Okay, so the police believed that Rey had done this to himself, even though the medical examiner didn't completely 100% agree with that. But how easy would it have been for Rey to jump from any number of places and land in that exact spot? According to the police, from the footage that they viewed, they did not see Rey in the Belvedere at all that day. So how did he get up to the roof? There's 3 possible places law enforcement believes he could have jumped from: the very top of the Belvedere Hotel, the upper parking garage where his friends had been when they'd spotted the hole in his shoes, or the 11th floor ledge. Let's go over the plausibility of each of these theories. The roof of the Belvedere Hotel is shaped like a square C. So if he was going to jump from there, he would have had to have done it from somewhere on the inside of that square C. The problem with this is that the hole was quite a distance out from the edge of the Belvedere roof. About 45 feet to be exact. Even if he had taken a running jump, it's still very unlikely he would have landed in that location of the hole, especially considering he was wearing flip-flops, which aren't the best foot gear if you want to get a real good speedy run in. Additionally, this is a very high roof. For a long time, the Belvedere was the tallest building in the city, and both Rey and Allison were afraid of heights, something else that they had bonded on. Why would Rey have willingly gone up to that roof and then took a running leap off of it? Neither Allison nor Detective Bayer believed Rey went off the top of the roof of the Belvedere. The second theory was that he may have jumped from the parking garage adjacent to the building. Now, the top of the garage roof was only 20 feet up from the roof where the hole was, a height that Detective Bayer felt Rey could have survived if he had fallen or jumped from it even after falling through the lower roof. But due to the extent of his injuries, how horrible they were, that theory was quickly dismissed. And then we have the 11th floor ledge of the Belvedere that wraps around the building. From the right place on this ledge, the position of the hole would have made sense, but in order to get to the 11th floor ledge, Rey would have had to have gone through the Belvedere, and even more, he may have had to have gone through someone's office or apartment in order to get out of the window on the 11th floor. There's no windows in the hallway that lead to that ledge. Additionally, Detective Bayer says that the windows were only half windows, some of them so old that they didn't even open, and when they did, they'd only open halfway. The ledge is also very narrow, very ornate, very high and scary. It wouldn't be easy to maneuver your way around it. And this theory must have been eliminated as well, because as far as I know, the police never dusted the windows on the 11th floor for Ray's prints or asked occupants of the 11th floor if they'd seen Ray or if he'd been a guest in their apartment. So from the investigation, these are the only 3 places that Ray could have possibly jumped from to land on that lower roof. And there's really strong evidence that eliminates at least the first 2, with the third being sort of up in the air. This was not the end of the strange discoveries. After Allison had been notified that her husband had been found, but he was dead, she went on a mission to figure out what had happened to him. She never believed, and still does not believe to this day, that he has taken his own life, nor did anyone in his family. And I do want to give this disclaimer before I continue. It's very typical in cases that are ruled as suicide for the friends and family of the victim to say, he would never do that, she would never do that. No one wants to believe or accept that their loved one would willingly end their own life. But there are other pieces of evidence we can examine which would suggest that Ray was making plans for the future, which in my opinion does cast doubt on the idea that he would just jump off a building while his wife was out of town. He and Allison had just put their house on the market. They were planning on moving back to California. He'd only been married for 7 months, and he was looking forward to starting his life with Allison, starting a family, shopping his script once they were back in LA. Not only that, but in the more short term, Ray had just booked an editing suite on the day he went missing so that he could finish his work project. He had already spent $70,000 between travel to Delray Beach, equipment, etc., so that he could get this project done, money that was supposed to be reimbursed by the Oxford Club upon completion of the project. Money that had been used on Allison's credit card. And when he died, the project was obviously never completed. Therefore, the Oxford Club did not have the DVDs to send to their subscribers that had already paid for them, and they did not reimburse Allison for the money that Ray had spent to make this project. She was literally left holding the bill. And I find it hard to believe that Ray would have ended his life knowing the bad financial position that he'd be leaving Allison in. And as Porter Stansberry had said after Ray went missing, Allison and Ray were planning on taking a trip to New Mexico 2 weeks later. Usually, if someone's going to end it all, they don't make plans for the future because they know there is no future. They know their plans will never be realized. There's no point. It's a waste of time for them. So Allison began searching through the house to find some clue or some indication of what had happened to her husband. And you could say she found what she was looking for. Ray had left a note taped to the side of his desktop computer in his office, but this wasn't a goodbye note. This wasn't a note filled with explanations and I'm sorries. This note was very strange and very mysterious. It had been typed out, but the font was shrunken down so that several pages could fit onto one sheet of paper that was about 7 inches long, folded to be made smaller, and then taped to the computer as if it was put there specifically to be hidden and maybe found at a later date. It was also cut on the right side of the paper so there would be no blank areas. And Allison found the scraps of this paper in the trash can of Ray's office, suggesting to her that he had either written it that day he disappeared or shortly before. And this note is very weird, guys. I've tried to decipher what it could mean. I've read the portions available over and over, typed everything into Google, and we're going to go pretty in depth into the note during the theory section. But I'm going to read what I have available to me now and try to give you a brief overview of what was in it and why it's so strange. The note begins, "Brothers and sisters, right now around the world, volcanoes are erupting. What an awesome sight." Now, this next part is in Latin. I don't speak Latin, and I know you guys like to make fun of me for how I pronounce things, but hopefully you do not expect me to get these Latin pronunciations completely correct. I'm going to try. Virtus junxit mores non separabate. And that's what this note said in Latin. And then in quotations after, he wrote the English translation, which is, "Whom virtue unites, death will not separate." The note goes on to say, "That was a well-played game. Congratulations to all who participated. I hope you enjoyed it, but it was time to wake up, so here I am. I'd like to welcome those who accepted our invitations for membership during the game. We couldn't have done it without you. I took on this endeavor to find the truth, but not for its own sake. in accepting this quest for the truth, I'd hoped to make myself, with the help of others, into a man worthy and ready to receive it. I stand before you a man that understands the purpose and value of our secrets. That's why I cherish them as secrets. Members of the council, please note that I will lend careful concentration to the traditional responsibilities in light of these proceedings, and I will satisfy the standard request of this council within the appropriate time. Again, well done to all who participated. I expect the council has invited all the players who gave their lives to this pursuit back, so they might join us here. So after this statement, there's a few names listed: Tom Hickling, Rayburn, Stanley Kubrick, and then a few names I can't really make out. It looks like Joan Tellini, Donna, Christopher Reeves. He writes next, "Fare thee well, Rob Rosenberg." He goes on to write, "Before I continue with my instructions to the council and claim the prize for my service, I'd like to allow Porter Stansberry to claim his prize. Now, Porter, don't waste these words by claiming something I'll just take back. Now that the game is finished, I expect the council to recompensate those who have given time and talent to this venture. Along with myself, these players should be made 5 years younger by the council." So after this very strange and mysterious statement, he lists a bunch of names. Not all of them can be made out, but he has his brother Angel in there, his father Angel, and he distinguishes between who his father Angel is and who his brother Angel is. His sister Elena, his mother Maria is on there. His wife's name is also on there, but he calls her Miss Allison Jones, which is her maiden name, not Allison Rivera. There's the name of a guy named Brad, who I guess he'd played water polo with in high school, who had also moved to Baltimore to work for Porter Stansberry. There's the name of a man named Andrew, who did the music for Ray's movie, a friend of Ray's named Steve, and his wife, Allison's mother and father, Allison's younger brother. What's worth mentioning is a lot of these names are men and women who worked for Agora or its subsidiaries, along with the names of their wives and children. There's a huge list of names, and then there's a gap followed by Porter Stansberry, if he didn't do it himself. The note continues, "Brothers and sisters, our land of achievements has seen many ideas become new innovations since my game began." Underneath this, he's got listed a bunch of things. Not all of it's clear, but it seems like this might be a list of the innovations that he's talking about. He lists radio frequency identification, digital music players, portable and otherwise, hybrid engines, computer operating systems, portable data assistants, flash drives, thermal depolymerization, horizontal drilling, Sudoku, the Human Genome Project, the heads-up display, cloning, the fuel cell, overnight express shipping, Wi-Fi, HDTV, CD, VCD, DVD, HDTV, Viagra and Viagra-type drugs, Internet, Ethernet, Bluetooth, MP3, JPEG, Invisalign, the Da Vinci surgical robot, muscle milk, email, Plavix, Lipitor, Xanax, Zycor, Zyprexia, Nexium, Prevacid, Zoloft, the Unitarian Church, and outsourcing. It feels like a Sesame Street episode where you have to guess like which one of these things is not like the other, because it's just a vast list of very different sorts of innovations, I suppose. He goes on to write in the letter, "The 1% of the rights, patents, and of the proceeds for all of them should have been transferred to me by now. I know that our host, Porter Stansberry, has created a way for you to do so. To arrange for future transactions, you should visit me at any of the properties that I will resume control of. My primary residence, which includes a beautiful piece of property in northern Argentina, and I'm told, the biggest mansion in Buenos Aires. Well done, Porter. In Europe, you can visit me at the house in Nice or in Madrid, although if I'm in Spain, I'll probably be at the Costa. In Asia, you will be able to find me in Thailand. Another job well done, Porter. I will keep the 2 houses in Los Feliz, California, and the 1 house in San Francisco, although I'll be looking for a new place in Baltimore and perhaps some other cities. I'd like to briefly mention some movies, books, and music I found very inspired and compelling. I'd love to meet any of you who helped contribute to these works. The Matrix 1, 2, and 3, The Family Man, National Treasure, The Da Vinci Code, Eyes Wide Shut, Confessions on a Dance Floor, Demon Days, 10 Summoner's Tales, November Rain, Home by Now, Meet Joe Black, Minority Report, Star Wars 1 through 3, Lord of the Rings 1 through 3, Fight Club, 7, The Game, Paycheck, Identity, The Bourne Identity, The Bourne Supremacy, Being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Team America World Police, and specifically, let me say that I expect M. Night Shyamalan to continue coming up with great ideas and making great movies. I certainly enjoyed his movies: Wide Awake, Sixth Sense, The Village, The Others, Signs, Unbreakable. I'd also like to signal out Keith Richards. You had a great run, buddy, but what's mine is mine. The game is up. The deed's been done. It's time for some shut-eye. There's another sentence in there, this is me talking now, and I can't really make it out, where Rey says he's jealous of someone because of their height. And then he says, I expect that my success has helped those that have helped me, and I expect that the focus of what could again include arachnia. I can't really make that out, but it looks like the focus could include arachnia. And then he goes on to say, so let me leave you with a phrase that helps give meaning to the game. Human progress is our cause. Liberty of thought, our supreme wish. Freedom of conscience, our mission. And the guarantee of equal rights for all peoples everywhere is our ultimate goal. Take care and enjoy the festivities. With this note, a blank check was found, drawn on the account of Rey's video production company that he'd just started. Now, there are many names mentioned in this very kind of creepy and terrifying letter, but only one name is mentioned more than once, multiple times, in fact, and that would be Porter Stansberry. And because of that, we're going to redirect our attention to him for just a moment. After Rey's body was found, it's reported that Porter was no longer a supportive friend to Rey's family. He pretty much ghosted them. In the Unsolved Mystery episode, we're told that within hours of the discovery at the Belvedere, Porter sent all his employees home and brought in a team of lawyers who then put a gag order on the entire company and refused to talk to the police or let the employees talk to the police. Now, Porter recently, like within this last week, came out and claimed he was disgusted at the way the show had portrayed him. He didn't like the fact that they said he was uncooperative. He claims he wasn't uncooperative. What's really strange, though, is that the call Rey got before running out of his house on May 16th was tracked, and it brought investigators to the offices of Agora and its subsidiaries. Now, no one there has ever admitted to having placed that call. But that same day, 5 calls had come in to Rey from the very same place. Unfortunately, Agora, the company, uses a switchboard to run all calls through, so the police couldn't trace any of these calls to a specific person or office or even building. We just know that the last call Rey got before he vanished and ended up dead was from an Agora company. According to Porter, it could not have come from his company, since every employee who had worked with Rey was at a corporate retreat on the Eastern Shore at the time the call was made. Porter also makes allegations that Rey was having personal problems, that Allison had confided to Porter, claiming she was worried about her husband's mental state at the time he went missing. Apparently, Allison had told Porter that the Saturday before he disappeared, Rey had been morose and wouldn't get out of bed. It's worth noting that Allison does not recall having this conversation with Porter Stansberry. Now, let's dive into the theories portion of this video, but this has to be done in 2 different sections. First, we have to examine the note that was taped to Rey's computer in more detail, and luckily, we have tons of people on Reddit who have already spent hours going over each line and giving their analysis on what it all might mean, and I did my own research as well to give my opinion and to kind of fact check. I wish, honestly, that I had more time to go over every single part of this note, because to me it's kind of like a puzzle that I want to solve, but I don't have that kind of time, so we have to depend on other people on the internet who do. Okay, so I already read the whole note to you, or at least that's what's available of the note. He starts with brothers and sisters, and then he talks about how right now there's volcanoes erupting all over the world. So I looked into volcanic activity from January of 2006 until the day he was discovered. The first one was on February 6th in Cleveland. Another one happened on February 11th in the Solomon Islands, located in the South Pacific. There was also one on February 17th in Japan, and another one on February 21st in the Philippines. There was one on March 1st in Papua New Guinea, another one in Alaska on March 3rd. and another one on March 9th in Guatemala. March 11th, there was one in Australia. This might seem like a lot of volcanic activity, but on any given day, there's at least 20 volcanoes erupting on Earth. Eruptions are just a way for the Earth to cool itself off, which is why they're always happening. It actually keeps things balanced, so they're good. But I'm not sure what Rey would have meant by this line in the letter. The next part of the letter, the Latin words and then their English translation, is a lot easier to decipher. Allison was also curious about this line, so she typed it into Google and found out that there was a link to this phrase and the Freemasons. So I'm going to do a quick 1-minute explanation for those of you who don't know who the Freemasons were and are. The Freemasons are kind of like a secret society that's not such a big secret. We know they exist, but we aren't entirely sure what all their rituals are or what they mean. They started out as the guilds of stonemasons and cathedral builders, which originated in Britain during the Middle Ages. Anyone, typically a man, most likely a man in those times, who was of a certain occupation or skill could join this club. A potential master mason as a child would be educated in languages and math. And when he became a teenager, he'd be taught to work with stone. And having a skill at this time in history was a very impressive thing. It gained you a lot of respect. As an adult, he would become a journeyman on the path to becoming a master mason, which would garner him a lot of credibility, a lot of respect. He would have clout in his community. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the organization evolved into more of what it kind of looks like today, what we know of today. There were a lot of different Masonic lodges which all had their specific code of conducts and rituals. The first Grand Lodge was established in 1717 in England, and more lodges began to pop up after that, which were branches off of that original Grand Lodge. There was a sort of like splinter or fracture, a split of the Freemasons when some of them ignored the order from the Grand Lodge that it was mandatory to believe in a higher power or a god. From this split, two different Freemason groups emerged: Continental Freemasons and Anglo-American Freemasons. Anglo-American Freemasons do not allow political discussions, and they follow the more traditional guidelines of the original Grand Lodge. The Continental Freemasons are known as liberal Freemasons. They don't feel the need to believe in a higher power, at least not all of them. Some of them can, of course, but it's not mandatory. And they also engage in political discussions and have butted heads with the Pope in Rome and the Catholic Church many times throughout history. Currently, there are 6 million reported members in various lodges around the world, and many of these members are influential people in politics and business, and they usually are wealthy, or at the very least, well-off, financially comfortable, let's say. They do not talk about their rituals. There's a lot of secrets that non-Masons can never find out about.
When I joined, the rituals were just about as crazy as I thought they would be. I asked everybody what they meant, and the answer was, well, you'll find out, don't worry. And over the next 2-3 years, it became evident that they hadn't a clue. Nobody knows what those rituals are about.
Because the members aren't allowed to talk about them with regular people. We do know that the ceremonies are still the same as they were originally, being passed down through generations and are based on the myth of King Solomon's temple. According to the Hebrew Bible, Solomon's temple was a holy temple in ancient Jerusalem, constructed under King Solomon's rule, and it was dedicated to Yahweh, the national god of the Iron Age kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Temple worship here included ritual sacrifice and ritual cleansing, and it is said to have housed the Ark of the Covenant. The story goes that a mason named Hiram Abiff was the chief architect of the temple, and as it was nearing completion, Hiram was ambushed by 3 fellow craft masons who wanted to know information about the master mason's secret passwords. When Hiram refused to tell them, he was killed.
The Masons wear ritual costumes that have symbolic ties to the temple. And within their lodge's secret-most chamber, they reenact the ritual murder of Hiram Abiff. What you're seeing is a recreation of the initiation rite of a master mason.
Apparently, this guy, Hiram, was the only person who knew the secret word of a master mason. So after his death, King Solomon informed the workforce on the temple that this word was lost forever and he'd have to come up with a substitute word, which is still a tightly held secret by modern Masons. So basically, the Freemasons are the world's oldest and largest fraternity with membership that showcases the who's who of world history.
George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Winston Churchill, Mozart, Davy Crockett, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Houdini, Gerald Ford, Henry Ford, John Wayne, even Colonel Sanders.
Now, those words that Rey wrote in both Latin and English, whom virtue unites, death will not separate, can occasionally be found on Masonic rings and was a motto used in the Lodge of Perfection, which is part of the Scottish Rite. In much of the note that is assumed to have been written by Rey, he talks about secrets and membership and a quest for the truth. He also talks about traditional responsibilities and other players or members who have given their lives in the pursuit of this game. One of these people listed is Tom Hickling, and this was a man who also worked for Agora but died just 6 months before Rey died. Tom died in a car accident while visiting his daughter in Zambia, which is in Africa. According to Rey's family, he'd always felt uneasy about Tom's death. In the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, a story is printed about Tom Hickling, because I believe Pittsburgh was his hometown, and they refer to him as an evangelical media star. It reads as follows, quote, with his ponytail and gift for spoofing goofy elements of evangelical subculture, Tom Hickling was not a stereotypical evangelical media personality, but Mr. Hickling, who died Tuesday in a car crash in Zambia, shaped Pittsburgh's evangelical culture in the 1980s and 1990s through his family's radio station, a singing ministry, a newspaper, and 2 television shows. Now, apparently, when Mr. Hickling's vehicle was struck by an oncoming car, his daughter, who was a relief worker working in Zambia at the time, she was with him in that car, and she suffered from a broken leg, but she clearly remembered before she was taken away for medical care, her father was lucid and was able to answer her when she asked if he was all right. He said he was, but later his wife got a call that a dead white man had been found in a car registered to her daughter Holly. On December 28, 2005, Bill Bonner posted an article to the Daily Reckoning. It had been written by Addison Wiggin, who is a kind of a bigwig at Agora. She wrote, quote, we have lost one of our Daily Reckoning founding fathers, a dear reader and a dear friend. We've always had a fondness for minstrels, misfits, and lost causes. At one time, Tom was probably all of these things. End quote. So what is the Daily Reckoning that Tom Hickling was a founder of? It's an internet newsletter sent to subscribers by email twice a day. They say that the purpose is to forecast booms, busts, and bad endings, and each day the market is open, they have the privilege of writing to subscribers with one big idea that they can profit from and make sense of in the world of finance, economics, and politics. So how did an evangelical musician who came from the world of radio and television end up working for a newsletter that talked about money and politics? Now, Rey told his mother, Maria, that he really liked Tom, that Tom was a real person, someone he could relate to in a sea of people who cared more about image than heart, and his death never sat well with Rey. Every other person on that list is also no longer alive, so why was Rey asking whoever would be reading this letter to invite them back? Anne Rayburn died on December 2nd, 2005. She was the sister of one of Rey's co-workers, George Rayburn, who is now the executive vice president of the Oxford Club. Joan Tellini died on November 1st, 2001, and she was the wife of the late Piero Tellini, who was an Italian screenwriter. Stanley Kubrick, obviously for those who don't know, was an American film director, producer, screenwriter, and photographer, and is often called one of the greatest filmmakers in cinematic history. He was involved with a lot of movies, but he's best known for Lolita, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Shining, and Eyes Wide Shut. Now, Kubrick died 6 days after showing the final cut of Eyes Wide Shut to Warner Brothers, so he wasn't even alive when it was released. Then we have that list of all of those people, including many of his family members who he believes should be made 5 years younger by the council. I thought it was very strange that he listed Allison, his wife Allison, by her maiden name instead of her married name, which makes me wonder if maybe he didn't write the note or the letter that day. Maybe he wrote it before they got married, since they had only been married 7 months. Allison also claimed there were some significant people missing from that list, but she didn't clarify and say who. Then we have this list of what he calls new innovations and inventions, such as the heads-up display, which was invented by General Motors in 1988, and the Human Genome Project, which was funded by the U.S. government in 1984. It was formally launched in 1990 and was declared complete on April 14th, 2003. And Sudoku, which was invented by a man named Howard Garnes, who was a freelance puzzle creator from Indiana in 1979. It's just all very strange, and it kind of makes you wonder if there is some sort of code embedded in it, or if he was in his right mind when he wrote it. Then the letter talks about how 1% of the proceeds for these inventions need to be transferred to him, and that Porter Stansberry has created a way for this to happen. A lot of these inventions and innovations were medical, like Viagra and Viagra, medicines, Prevacid, etc. And Stansberry Research, which was the name Pirate Investment LLC took after getting investigated by the SEC, they did have some investments in medical patents. A quote from an article discussing these patents says, quote, "For example, we picked Intuitive Surgical in March 2004 when it was an $18 stock, and we booked a 124% return a little over a year later in April of 2005. Today, their shares trade for nearly $530. End quote. Now, one of Intuitive Surgery's key products is the Da Vinci surgical robot, which Rey listed in this letter. And Rey moved to Baltimore to work for Stansberry in early 2004, so he would have been there when they began investing in this company. And all of these locations that Rey was talking about owning property in, it's very clear that he doesn't actually or legally own property in any of these countries or states. Some of these places do, however, correspond with areas that Bill Bonner of Agora owns properties, such as Argentina and France. Rey also mentions in this letter that he owns the biggest mansion in Buenos Aires, which, when you look that up, he'd be talking about Casa Rosada, which is the official workplace of the president of Argentina. So the president of Argentina, he doesn't live there full time, but it's considered his office where he works. The note also mentions Madrid and Thailand. Now, Madrid was where Rey was born, if you remember, on the Air Force Base, and Agora has offices in both Madrid and Thailand. We obviously don't have time to go over all the movies and music Rey listed. I wish we did, because I have some very interesting connections and insights, but we can determine sort of what connects them, what makes them all the same or similar. Now, he listed in the music portion, and he kind of mixed all of these together. So it was like movies and songs and albums kind of all mixed together. They weren't organized by genre. He listed 4 albums and 1 song, but he doesn't distinguish which are albums and which are songs. Now, the first album was Madonna's Confession on a Dance Floor. So I pulled the track lists for these albums to see if there was any songs that might be coded or have a clue. Track number 8 on that album is called Jump. The album Demon Days is by the Gorillaz, and they have tracks on there called Don't Get Lost in Heaven, White Light, All Alone, November Has Come, Every Planet We Reach Is Dead, Dare, and Last Living Souls. 10 Summoner's Tales is an album by Sting, and it has a song called St. Augustine is in Hell, another song called She's Too Good for Me. Home by Now is an album by the Animators with tracks called Nice Guy, Rearrange, Better Not Say, Medicine, A Perfect World, and Help Is on the Way. The only actual song he listed apart from albums was November Rain by Guns N' Roses. Now on to the movies. What do they all have in common? The Matrix movies are pretty popular. You guys probably know what they're about. It's pretty much just about living in a simulation, and some people choose to wake up to this and realize that they're living in a simulation, while others choose to remain blissfully ignorant. Now, the main character, Neo, and his friends are constantly being chased by this Agent Smith, who's an AI that's programmed to keep order within the system by terminating basically anything and anyone who would bring instability to the Matrix. And the people who have chosen to wake up and realize they're living in a simulation are typically the people who bring instability to the Matrix. Now, National Treasure, I think it's a Disney movie. I know it's kind of like a kid movie. It's a movie that deals with secret societies like the Knights of Templar and the Freemasons, and how the main character discovers that someone's about to steal the Declaration of Independence. So he goes to the police and the government to report this, but he's basically written off as a conspiracy theorist. They treat him like he's crazy. I get that feeling. I get that all the time. We also have the Da Vinci Code, which also centers around secret groups who are trying to find the location of the Holy Grail. And there's a bunch of secret codes that need to be figured out, all while running away from the police and the government who are trying to stop the main characters from protecting the location of the Holy Grail. We have Eyes Wide Shut, Kubrick's last film, which centers around a massive secret society for the elite, and they have these lavish orgy parties where people get killed for revealing their secrets, and then their deaths are covered up and reported as suicides. The Family Man, if I remember correctly, because I didn't really look any of these up, I'm just basing everything off of memory. The Family Man, it was starring Nicolas Cage, and he was basically like this rich kind of like tycoon guy. He had this huge apartment in like New York City or something, but he kind of always remembered his girlfriend from when he was younger and how he made the decision to like pursue his career instead of pursuing love, and kind of wondering how things would have been different if he'd taken another path. And one day he goes into a gas station. I think there's some sort of robbery. And then the clerk, who's played by Don Cheadle, I love Don Cheadle. He's basically this person who works for like a society or something. And he has the power to send Nicolas Cage back to see what his life would have been like if he'd taken the route of, following romance instead of following his career. And then Nicolas Cage realizes, he much rather would have preferred that life, but Don Cheadle's like, sorry, you already made your decision, like it is what it is. We also have Minority Report, which takes place in the future, and the future police force is able to determine what crimes are going to happen before they even happen and put a stop to them. It's kind of a movie about how technological innovations may have been created to help humanity, but they end up instead being used to control the population, manipulate the population, and keep them in check. Star Wars 1 through 3, the original trilogy, depicts the adventures of characters in a galaxy far, far away where there's robots and humans living together, and people time travel all the time. Everything is bound together by the Force, and if you can channel the Force, then you develop certain special abilities like telepathy and telekinesis. Lord of the Rings 1 through 3 is a fictional story that takes place in, a world where there's magic and wizards, and then there's a ring to rule them all that Frodo, our main character, needs to keep out of the hands of a dark lord that wants to use the ring for evil instead of good. Very similar, actually, to the plot of the Da Vinci Code. Fight Club, we all know Fight Club. It's about a man who has an alter ego, and he basically starts this fight club that no one can talk about because that's the first rule, and he doesn't even figure out that his alter ego isn't an entirely different person until the end of the movie when he's literally shook by this, but his alter ego was Brad Pitt, so I think he kind of, traded up there. We could go on and on, right? But there's certain themes that tie all these together. A mistrust in the government, technology, information, and intelligence being used not for the betterment of mankind, but to control them. Time travel, how if you could go back, you might be able to make different choices and lead a different life, almost like you were made 5 years younger. Secret societies or secret groups that hide in the shadows using their money, power, and anonymity to pull the strings around the world and change and control things. One of these movies was The Game, a movie where the main character, Michael Douglas, finds himself involved with a company called the Consumer Recreation Services. I guess Michael Douglas in this movie is like unhappy about his life. He has too much money, too much power and control. So a friend hands him a voucher for a game and says like, this is going to change your life. But Michael Douglas gets sort of like agitated, and he doesn't like that he has to jump through all of these hoops and undergo psychological and physical tests in order to even like apply and be a part of this game. And then he begins to feel like this game is putting him in danger. He finds out that these strangers that he meets, who he thought were just innocent regular people, are actually undercover CRS employees. He also finds out he's being watched by this company, and then they, drain his bank accounts. He ends up being drugged, knocked out, and he wakes up buried alive in Mexico, where he has to sell the watch he's wearing to get home, only to discover that his mansion's been foreclosed on. Many of his personal possessions have been taken. They're gone, and he's pretty much ruined. He's lost everything. He finally loses it. He gets a gun, but when he meets with his contact from the CRE, one of the people that he thought was innocent but turned out to be like, an undercover CRE employee, she sees that he has a weapon and she tries to talk him down. And she's like, no, this is all part of the game. Everything's normal. Your money's going to come back. Your house is going to come back. This is what the game's about. And on the other side of that door are all your friends and family, and they're waiting to, celebrate with you. But he doesn't believe her because he's paranoid at this point. So he shoots the first person on the other side of the door, who ends up being a friend of his who's got like a bottle of champagne ready to celebrate. Devastated over this, Douglas's character throws himself off a building and falls through like a glass roof, where he lands on this inflatable cushion only to find his friend there, who he thought he had killed, and all, the other people that are part of the game, and they all celebrate. They all help him become a better person and be appreciative of all he has. Everyone lives happily ever after. I do want to say about this note found taped to Ray's computer. There's no proof that Rey Rivera ever wrote these words. We speculate that he did because it was found in his house on his computer. But the words, the letter, it's typed out, so there's no way to compare to see if it's his handwriting. But I think there's a strong possibility that he did not write it. It's a possibility. But whoever did write it obviously wanted people to think it was being written by Rey, which is why he listed people like Angel, my father, Maria, my mother. In the note, there's a word used, recompensate. This is not a real word. Compensate's a real word. Recompensate is not a real word. Now, Rey was a writer. He wrote screenplays. He attended the Los Angeles Film School to learn to be a better writer. And I think he would have known that recompensate is not a real word, and I don't think that he would have used it, but that's just my opinion. If Rey did not write this letter and someone else did, they clearly listed family members of Rey's and friends of Rey's to make it seem that the requests for them to be made 5 years younger were coming from Rey, but there's no way, like I said, to actually prove that he wrote it. And I wonder if it was ever even dusted for fingerprints to see if he'd ever touched it. One thing we can agree on, however, is that the note is incredibly creepy, and it seems to be very random and scattered at first glance. Allison claimed that Rey often wrote down random things as he went through life, ideas for screenplays and stories, but his notes were typically much more organized than this, and they weren't shrunk down and taped to the side of his computer as if they were being hidden from someone. And I get this because I do write, and I'm always coming up with ideas like right before I fall asleep for some reason, and I'll grab my phone and I'll text them to myself so that when I see my text the next morning, I know. But they are not written in like a code like this. They're not written to the point where I wouldn't be able to understand what I meant by them the next day, because I wrote them when I was half asleep. I don't think that this was something he was just writing for, a screenplay, because it was clearly strange, and it was also hidden. Many people believe this note could be written in code, but if that's true, it would take quite a long time to reveal the actual meaning behind the words. They could be anagrams. The first letter of every word could be put together to mean something. There's a lot to unpack, and both the Baltimore police and the FBI looked at this note and concluded that it was not a suicide note. The FBI released a report where they claimed the overall themes and specific language in the letter were more consistent with someone who suffered from a delusional disorder or bipolar disorder. The criteria they believed Rey would have to meet in order to have a delusional disorder were he'd have to be having non-bizarre delusions for 1 month or longer, mood episodes that would have occurred at the same time and would have been brief compared to the delusional periods. This report also claimed that a person can be highly functional in many areas of their life, and in this particular case, the mental illness that was possibly being suffered by Rey may have gone virtually undetected by his family, friends, and coworkers, which leads us into the actual theories. Theory 1. Was Rey Rivera suffering from delusions or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder? And as a result, he took his own life by jumping from some undetermined place on the roof of the Belvedere Hotel? He does go back and forth in this letter between talking about people he knows and talking about famous people that he doesn't personally know. He requests that this council make him and, people he knows 5 years younger. He talks about people giving their life to the game and then being brought back to life to rejoin the group. He talks constantly about a game, but he never actually discusses or specifies what that game is. He also seems to think that he's the owner of many lavish properties around the world and that he's about to come into a great deal of money from all of these inventions that he's entitled to receive payment for. To really anyone, these words do seem delusional. It seems like he's slowly losing grip with reality. Additionally, Allison said herself that when she arrived in Baltimore, her husband seemed very different to her. Withdrawn, distracted, not his usual happy-go-lucky self. She attributed this to Rey not liking his job, but what if his personality and mood changes were related to a mental illness? he was very paranoid in the weeks leading up to his death, insisting that he accompany his wife Allison while she was running, getting very stressed out when he saw a man approaching her on the track. But all of these things can also be explained by other circumstances. What if Rey was actually scared? What if he had gotten in over his head with someone or a group of someone's? What if he did know something that he felt had put him and his family in danger? His paranoia didn't bring into existence his home security system being triggered 2 nights in a row, the 2 nights before he went missing, and the master bedroom window to be tampered with. His paranoia didn't cause that. Unless he too is like Edward Norton in Fight Club and he has this Brad Pitt alter ego who does things that he doesn't remember the next day. But remember also, the same day he disappeared, Rey had talked to a man, Mark Gold, who rented out recording suites, and he'd scheduled to have one of these recording suites the next week. Would he have done this and then within a few hours just decided to end it all? And if he were planning on taking his own life, why would he do it in this way? Especially because his wife Allison and his family all claimed that Rey was terrified of heights. He and Allison had just put their house on the market. They were going back to California so he could hopefully sell Midnight Polo. He'd worked very hard and very long on Midnight Polo, and it was finally finished, and he was ready to pitch it. Why would he decide now was the time to just leave? He and Allison were planning a trip to New Mexico just a few weeks later. If what the police and the FBI are saying is true, and Rey took his own life, he pretty much went from a man who was hopeful, a man who was making plans for the future, to a man that no longer wanted to be alive pretty much overnight. There's also the little issue of the investigation never actually giving a conclusive answer to where Rey jumped from. The only way he could have possibly jumped and ended up where that hole was if he'd gone off the 11th floor ledge. Now, Unsolved Mysteries, like I said, claims this would be very difficult. They said it was a very narrow ledge, very ornate, that by the time he would have made it to where he wanted to be to jump, he might have already fallen off because it was dangerous to maneuver. But many people on the internet believe that Rey could easily have gotten out onto the ledge since there are ballrooms on the 11th floor with windows that open up to the ledge. And many times those ballrooms would be, left open. They wouldn't be locked up. But the question still remains, why? Why would he do that? Even if he wanted to end it all, why choose this way? I do see very big similarities between the movie The Game and what ended up happening with Rey. Maybe he had broken with reality. Maybe the note was a result of a manic episode. Maybe when he was describing the game, he was referring to his life. But it is odd that his wife and family vehemently believe that Rey did not kill himself and there was foul play involved. Is it just because they don't want to believe that about him? Or should we maybe stop writing them off and listen to them a little bit more since they would be the ones who knew him the best? His mother claims she will never believe that he took his own life, saying, quote, "I knew because of my own observations of his behavior and because of the things that came out of his mouth. When anyone that we knew was depressed, it was always Rey that would help them, talk to them, give them reasons to live." And apparently not only was Rey afraid of heights, but his mother says he'd never gotten over his fear of death, and they had many conversations about it. I mean, honestly, do any of us ever get over our fear of death? If you've been watching me for a while, you know that it's one of the things I fear the most, and I think about it all the time. And I know because of how afraid I am of that inevitable end, I know I would never, end my own life because I'm so scared of the day that will come where my life ends. A friend of Rey's from church said he was always upbeat and happy. He had so much to live for. His other friend, Cynthia, the woman he'd befriended on the plane, says that she just can't wrap her head around it. He was so vital. He never seemed depressed. Even Porter Stansberry told reporters initially when Rey went missing that he was a happy guy, not a man who wanted to leave. But one thing that does give me pause is the penny he had in his pocket, the one Allison had brought him after she went out of town for a trip. The one she told him that whenever he held it, she would be with him, and she was out of town at this point. It was always in the same place, in a bowl on his dresser, but that day he had it in his pocket. Missing from his pocket was the silver money clip that Allison had given him as a wedding gift. And he always had that on him, so the whole thing is strange. Why did he have the penny, and where's the money clip? Did he know he was going to end his own life? Did he grab that penny? Is that what he forgot to grab when Claudia said he came back to the house for a minute and then left again? Did he grab that penny wanting Allison close to him? Now, theory number 2 is that he was murdered and that Porter Stansberry or someone else from Agora is involved. It's very clear to see why this theory is a popular one. The call that came in on May 16th that prompted Rey to leave his house in such a hurry, it came from the Agora switchboard. And after Rey's body was discovered, Agora employees were instructed to not talk to the police. Additionally, when Porter Stansberry realized Unsolved Mysteries was covering this case, Stansberry and associates sent a cease and desist letter to Netflix trying to get them to not air the episode. When that didn't work, they hired a crisis management team. Now, this is a man who claims Rey was his best friend, a man who grew up with Rey and seemed genuinely concerned when he was missing. But as soon as he ended up being dead, Porter completely changed his tune. Porter didn't want to talk to the police. Even Allison, who came to his house after Rey's Baltimore memorial to ask Porter why he hadn't gone, he pretty much iced her out and said he didn't want to, deal with it and he didn't want to be a part of it. And to me, that's suspicious. Not only that, but Porter's name was mentioned several times in that note that was taped to Rey's computer. As far as Baltimore PD could tell, no one saw Rey in the Belvedere the day he went missing, and supposedly he fell from some height through a roof. If he'd gone out onto the 11th floor ledge, surely someone would have seen him from either inside the Belvedere or outside, especially surveillance video footage would have captured him, but that footage has unfortunately been corrupted or gone missing or been erased. It depends who's telling the story. The police report also claimed that Rey Rivera was familiar with the hotel and had been there many times, but Allison said they did go to the Owl Bar in the hotel, but just once or twice, and they'd never been to the 13th floor nightclub or any other areas of the Belvedere. Did Rey sometimes go there with coworkers, considering Agora's offices were less than a 10-minute walk away? It's possible, but if he was such a frequent visitor of the Belvedere, you'd think an employee there, a doorman or a desk person or something would have recognized him. They would have noticed him walking around the place the fateful day he ended up dead on the floor of one of their offices. Dr. Melissa Brassel was the ME who did the autopsy. She wrote in that report that the injuries at the time of the autopsy were consistent with a fall from a height. But because the circumstances surrounding the incident are unclear, and it's not known how the deceased came to have precipitated from a height, the manner of the death has been classified as undetermined. According to Allison, Dr. Brassel also told her that she knew what they were doing and they were not closing the case, which I think, if it's true, means she knew the police were kind of trying to just write it off as a suicide and move on to the next case. And even though most of his injuries were consistent with a fall from a height, she didn't feel that the way his legs were broken was consistent with a fall from a height. And what about his sandals, phone, sunglasses? They were all located on the roof with the hole. Did he jump from a higher area, go through the roof, and then his sandals just happened to fly off his feet and his phone and his sunglasses just came out of his pocket onto the roof and ended up without a scratch on them? Did he toss these things down ahead of time before he jumped, which still wouldn't explain why there was no damage to these items at all, or why his flip-flops were ripped if he hadn't been wearing them when he jumped? Maybe his flip-flops were ripped from this precarious kind of ornate ledge on the 11th floor that he had to maneuver to end up jumping from it. To go along with this theory that there's foul play, we have the helicopter theory that's become popular on the internet. Since it was so hard to pin down exactly where Rey may have jumped, fallen, or been pushed in order to have ended up on that exact spot on the roof, some theorize that he may have been dropped or pushed out of a helicopter from above. During the Unsolved Mysteries episode, investigative journalist Stephen Janis said, quote, "Given the hole and given that nobody saw him enter the building, he had to come from somewhere else," end quote. Detective Michael Bayer didn't believe it was possible for Rey to have come out of a helicopter due to airspace issues, given that helicopters aren't allowed to fly that low in Baltimore, and there was no reports of helicopters flying in that area that night. But Gary Shivers, the manager of the Belvedere, claims that a helicopter was indeed flying in the area that night, just a few blocks away. Reddit users have gone back and forth on this one. Some say it would be possible, and after all, Porter did show up to Rey's wedding in a helicopter. Others say it makes no sense considering they would have had to have rented a helicopter with a pilot and get airspace permission. Additionally, Makita Brotman, who wrote the book about Rey, remembered hearing a crashing sound around 10 p.m. that night, which, if she's being truthful, was most likely the sound of Rey going through the roof. But at that time, she didn't hear any accompanying noises, and helicopters do make a lot of noise. But even those who don't believe the helicopter theory still have a hard time taking the next leap in assuming that Porter Stansberry had absolutely nothing to do with this and is hiding absolutely nothing. Stansberry's company was fined $1.5 million by the SEC. He was being investigated for shady business dealings, so there's really no telling what could have been going on at that company that Rey might have stumbled upon and that someone might have done anything to keep secret. Theory number 3 has to do with the Freemasons. Now, like I said, the Freemasons are the world's largest secret society, so they've always held an appeal for people who are interested in these sorts of things. And the idea is that this group has been around for a very long time, and they've been working to bring about, a one world government, a new world order. They say that on the $1 bill, there's a picture of an eye. This is the all-seeing eye, or the Eye of Providence, which is part of the standard Freemason iconography. Many people believe that the Eye of Providence on the $1 bill was placed there by the Freemasons, so they've obviously been pulling the strings and calling the shots behind the scenes for quite a while. And Benjamin Franklin, who was a known Freemason, was on the design and planning committee, I guess you would call it, for, American currency. Now, this has been allegedly debunked. The debunkers say that the Masons didn't use this eye until 14 years after the $1 bill was created. But, that just means they didn't use it publicly, right? They are a secret society, so the Eye of Providence could have been something very important to them since, the very beginning, and they just didn't, publicly announce it or show it. There are a bunch of theories that have swirled around the Freemasons for years. It's all very dark, very mysterious, very interesting, which is why I'm not surprised that Rey wanted to learn more about the Freemasons, which is exactly what he did. The weekend before he died, his wife claims he couldn't look up from a book he was reading called The Builders, a story and a study of Freemasonry by the author J. Kinney. The day he went missing, he went to a bookstore and purchased the book Freemasons for Dummies, and that same day he actually met with someone at a local Freemason temple to inquire about joining. Now, this person that he talked to at the lodge said there was nothing out of the ordinary about his meeting with Rey. It just seemed that Rey was asking questions and interested in learning more about the Freemasons and potentially joining. Now, where Rey's interest in the Freemasons came from is still a mystery. Was he actually interested in joining? Was he doing research for a screenplay he wanted to write? Did he think the company he'd been working at for the last 2 years was filled with Masons doing secret Masony things? It would certainly explain the cryptic nature of the note, since Freemasons are forbidden from writing down any ritual in any way where it could be deciphered by a non-Mason. There was also a blank check with the note, if you remember, and some believe that this was for Rey's initiation fee into the Masons. Now, Allison remembers the Sunday before Rey died. They had just gotten home from church, and they were walking into the house. Rey pulled out his cell phone. He called someone, got their voicemail, and said, "Hey man, I just figured it all out. Call me back." The person that he called and left a voicemail for was Porter Stansberry, and Porter claims that the voicemail was random and he didn't understand what it meant. Now, okay, but here's my question. If I got a strange voicemail like this from my friend, I would call back my friend or text them, or like the next time I saw them, I'd be like, "Hey, what'd you mean by that voicemail? That was kind of weird." But allegedly that never happened. Porter never followed up with Rey to see why he had said this strange thing on his voicemail. Porter also claimed that Rey had previously asked him if he was a Freemason, but Porter had thought he was joking because Rey was kind of a jokester. No other Agora employees ever spoke about Rey and his death publicly, except for one person, William Bonner, who mentioned during some podcast interview that they used to have an employee who he knew took his own life because of personal issues that he was struggling with. But he could assure everyone that his death had nothing to do with Agora or the SEC investigation. On the other hand, investigative reporter Jane Miller, who covered Rey's death frequently in the early years, she claims she did find a connection between what happened to Rey and the SEC investigation, and when she printed it, she basically got an angry letter from Agora. And in an interview, Porter Stansberry told the host that Bonner had always been a good friend, when it mattered. But he didn't call him or talk to him regularly. The only time he had ever called him out of the blue was after Porter had lost a close friend. 7 months after Ray's death, Porter and his wife purchased a $1.5 million house in a Baltimore suburb. Now, are all these little tidbits that I just gave you connected? William Bonner claims to know that Ray took his own life, claims to know that Ray was struggling with personal issues, and that's why he took his own life. But as far as I know, William Bonner had never even met Ray. So how would he know this? And then Porter claiming that Bonner called him once in his life out of the blue, and that was after Ray died. What did Bonner call Porter for after Ray died? Was he trying to get information? Was he trying to figure out what Porter knew? Was he just calling as this good friend when it mattered? And Porter suddenly coming into enough money to purchase a very pricey home less than a year after his best friend is found dead on the floor of an old hotel. Many people speculate that Ray was on the rooftop of the Belvedere for an initiation that went wrong. Those who don't believe this theory have cited the fact that Ray says brothers and sisters in his letter, but the Freemasons are a fraternity. They only let men in, but that's not true. There are Freemason lodges who do allow women into their groups. So that's not true. There are women Freemasons now. 2020. Additionally, the lead detective on Ray's case was a man named Fred Bealfield, who we talked about really briefly in this video. But it also turns out that Fred Bealfield was a master mason. And he said, quote, based on what we've seen, his, meaning Ray's, intent in the Masonic order was not necessarily to do charitable work. Somehow it was linked to the movie industry, and this theory that somehow there was some control being exerted by the Masonic order. Now, it's not uncommon for many police officers and people in law enforcement and, all other walks of life to be a Freemason. That's not uncommon. It's actually very common. So that doesn't say anything suspicious, I guess, on its own. But then you've got Detective Michael Baer, who was really the only member of the Baltimore PD to not immediately write Ray's death off as a suicide, and he continued investigating it as an open case. He claims during the Netflix Unsolved Mysteries episode that he did not believe it was a suicide and he thought there might be more to it. But 3 weeks after Ray was found, Baer was taken off the case and reassigned. They said he got too close to it. He became too emotionally invested. And since when is a police officer becoming emotionally invested in finding the truth, no matter where it brings them? Since when is that a bad thing? Additionally, when Allison went to the police station to pick up Ray's belongings, including his computer, a detective told her that someone had called already a couple of times and asked to pick up the computer, and they were also very interested in the status of the computer, so maybe had it been processed yet, had anything been found on it. So somebody called several times who wasn't Allison asking about Ray's computer. And why has the person who made the call to Ray that day, the one that sent him running from his house and to his death, why have they not come forward and said, hey, it was me, I called him, and it was a completely benign conversation, we just talked about work, or, I asked him what he was doing that weekend, or I asked him how long it was going to be till the project was finished? Why hasn't anyone come forward to clear that part up? Because to me, the note and that call are the most mysterious parts of this case. There's also the little issue of the police file on the case being so difficult to get. There have been many Freedom of Information Act requests done, but no one ever gets the file, and if they do, it's just a few pages that are heavily redacted. Now, investigative journalist Stephen Janis did try to get a hold of the file, only to find through a police contact that the file wasn't where it was supposed to be, and the only remaining copy could be found in the locked desk of Marvin Sidner, who was the detective that took over for Michael Baer after he was reassigned. At the end of the day, I don't know what to think, but I certainly don't think that it has ever been an open and shut case with a simple explanation. Rey Rivera could have been suffering from mental illness, even though no one in his life noticed, even though he had no family history of mental illness. I just have a hard time believing he went up to the roof of the Belvedere and took a running leap off of it of his own free will. Now, someone on Reddit who dismissed the helicopter theory said it was hard to believe the helicopter theory because there's a zillion better ways to kill someone and get rid of the body, and I 100% agree. I don't believe in the helicopter theory. But I would also feel that there are a zillion better ways to accomplish what the police allege Ray was trying to accomplish. Why would he have chosen that one? It's terrifying. It's painful, even for someone who's not afraid of heights. Now, there's also the Owl Bar that's located in the Belvedere Hotel, and some point to it as possibly being connected to the Bohemian Grove. Unfortunately, like, we just don't have enough time to talk about the connection to the Bohemian Grove because I think that this video is literally going to be 2 hours long already. But I have been considering making a video on the Bohemian Grove for Halloween, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. I would really love to do a deep dive into that. I think it's very spooky, very mysterious, crazy. I got lots of opinions and thoughts on it, and I got lots of information too because I did kind of look into it a little bit a couple months ago. So tell me if that's something you'd like to see for Halloween, and also make sure you let me know what your theory is about what happened to Rey Rivera. Was he murdered? Did he take his own life? Was he suffering from a mental illness that caused him to lose touch with reality and as a result maybe think that he was in a movie where he could jump off a building and land on an inflatable pillow where all his friends would be there to greet him with champagne? Was there some sort of Masonic connection? How involved is Porter Stansberry? And like I said, or I don't know if I've said this, but don't send anybody that we talk about in this video hate or like accuse them of being a murderer or anything like that. This is just speculation. This is just people on the internet talking about true crime and theories and mysteries and stuff. We don't need to go to Porter Stansberry and like attack him because I think he does say that that is happening, and I don't want to be a part of that. He's got a wife, he's got kids, they have nothing to do with this, and as far as we know, he has nothing to do with this. It's just a theory. So let's be adults here and not do that because nobody deserves that. Innocent until proven guilty. We still have that in our country, right? But let me know what you think about the theories, and make sure to check out Magellan TV in the description box. Check me out on Twitter and Instagram, and you can follow me on there. If you are subscribed, check and make sure you're still subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe people from my channel. If you liked this video, hit the like button. If you feel it's worth sharing, then share it. And also, make sure you leave me a comment. Let me know. I love reading your comments. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Thank you to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Thank you to my patrons who keep me going every single day. And thank you to all of you out there who continue to come back and watch these videos, even though they can get kind of long sometimes. I really appreciate you guys. I love you. And hopefully I'll have a more permanent like recording area soon and things will be back to normal instead of me just sitting on my couch and my dog's jumping off every time and barking and making me have to stop recording. All right, stay kind, stay beautiful, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.
Straight down, and that river runs deep. The mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried is looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name. Better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slow.